White people often think of lynchings as something that happened in the dark of night when a few rogue characters whisk a black person away and murder them. And maybe that's what's happening today in the lynchings that are occurring today. But historically in this country, I think we need to be aware of a different reality. Lynchings in American history of black people have taken place in a ritualistic way. There's an order to it. And it looks like this. I'll illustrate with the case of Jesse Washington. Now, Jesse was a 17-year-old kid. He was a farm laborer in Waco, Texas. Texas was notorious for stuff like this. Here's the first part of the ritual. He was accused of murdering a white woman. Her name was Lucy Fryer, and she was his boss's wife. Well, he got a trial. It lasted about an hour, and the jury deliberated for just a couple minutes before they sentenced him to death. And what happened next is this pattern that happens throughout history in all these so-called spectacle lynchings. A crowd storms into the courtroom. They seized Washington and dragged him through town. Now, sometimes they break the guy out of jail. Sometimes they go to his home and drag him away. And then there's the audience. In the spectacle gatherings, there can be a big crowd. There were 5,000 to 10,000 people at Jesse Washington's murder, and they brought picnics. There were photographers. It was a party. So this was a community event that white people did to bolster white supremacy. Oh, good, we're going to have a lynching. And let's plan for that. We know what goes into a lynching. It's always the same. Let me bring in the point about this being a family affair. Businesses closed, schools let out, and children were an active part of the lynching scene. This creeps me the fuck out. Then comes a period of torture. It's rare for someone to immediately be hung to death. Usually there's torture first. In the case of Jesse Washington, this 17-year-old kid, he was hung by a chain over a tree, and then the chain was raised and lowered into a fire below his feet repeatedly for approximately 2 hours until he finally died. During this process, while he was still alive, he would occasionally try to pull himself out of the fire because his body was burning. Well, they didn't like this, so they cut off his fingers so that he could no longer pull himself out of the fire. Families posed for photographs. So after Mr. Washington died, people rushed up to the remains and cut away pieces of Mr. Washington's body as souvenirs. Children participated in the dismembering of the body. Boys pulled the teeth out of his skull to either sell or keep for souvenirs. Now, it is not easy to get the teeth out of a young adult in their prime. They had to use force. They had to have teamwork. And the children did this. Children stood over his burnt body and pried or broke teeth from his skull while adults watched. And then after it was all over, the photographers sold the pictures. They sold the pictures of the murder. It was a public ritual of racial terror that was witnessed, approved, and remembered apparently fondly by an entire community. Our culture, such as it is, devised a system of ritualized murder of black people. Those kids lived on, and they raised kids. A kid who participated in a lynching raised children, and those children grew up, and their children are alive now. So you can see how the ritual destroys the notion that this was just random crazy acts, and supports the notion that this was a community event that was ritualized and valued. Religious leaders were often involved in the accusation and in the trial and participated in the lynchings. Get curious.
Let me tell you where the word lynching really comes from, because the version that we were taught is a lie by omission, of course. Listen, everybody knows what lynching has become. The ropes, the trees, the mobs, the bodies left hanging as warnings, the terror that we inherited. But almost nobody ever learns where the word even came from. And once you learn that part, you understand something this country never says out loud. Lynching didn't start with murder. It started with permission. Permission for white men to punish whoever they wanted, however they wanted, whenever the legal system didn't give them the outcome that they preferred. So, let me tell you. During the Revolutionary War, Charles Lynch wasn't satisfied with the courts, so he built his own. He ran informal tribunals on his property. Not real courts, not real trials. He rounded up people suspected of supporting the British. Not proven guilty, not tried, not even properly questioned. Just suspected. And then he punished them. Whipping, imprisonment, forced labor, property seizure. All without a judge, without a jury, without evidence. People called it Lynch's Law, a nickname for punishment outside of the legal system. And here's the part that matters. He wrote to the Virginia legislature asking for protection, and instead of reprimanding him, they passed a law giving him and his men retroactive immunity. Think about that, right? America didn't just tolerate extra legal punishment. It validated it. That's the seed of the word lynching, and that seed grew into something that this country still hasn't reckoned with. In the 1780s, lynching didn't mean killing. It meant punishment without trial. It meant white men deciding that the law wasn't strict enough. It meant vigilante authority with government approval. By the 1830s, newspapers were using the word everywhere. But after the Civil War, when black people were suddenly citizens on paper, that's when the word mutated. Lynch's Law went from punishing loyalists to punishing black freedom. White mobs used it to justify terror, assaults, hangings, burnings, shootings, mutilation, public torture, all for things like voting, owning land, standing their ground, protecting their families, or simply existing outside of the bounds that white supremacy created. Lynching didn't become racial violence by accident, though. It became racial violence because the legal system allowed it to shift in that direction and then refused to stop it. From 1882 to 1968, at least 3,442 black people were lynched, not as punishment, as terror, as a message, as a warning to every black person watching. And Congress blocked anti-lynching laws for over 120 years. They protected the word longer than they protected the people suffering under it. So here's the truth, the part they hoped you'd never connect. The word lynching didn't come from the violence. The violence came from the permission that was baked into that word from the start. A permission that said some people get due process. Other people get whatever the mob chooses. And America looked at Charles Lynch's backyard justice system and said, yeah, that works for us. So when you say the word lynching, know this. You're not just naming racial terror. You're naming a legal tradition. You're naming a philosophy that shaped this country. You're naming a system built on white men deciding that due process could be optional. So know where the word came from, know what it became, and know that this country never wanted you to connect the two. The United States waited 111 years to make lynching a federal hate crime. 3 generations of black families burying their dead, while this country sat on the law that could have stopped it. And I want to tell you about one of them. Her name was Laura Nelson. Laura Nelson was 33 years old. She had a husband named Austin. She had a 15-year-old named LD. By some accounts, she also had a baby with her. A small farm in Oklahoma, a family, a life. And on the evening of May 24th, 1911, 40 white men came to the county jail and took her out of her cell. And I need you to stay with me for this. A deputy sheriff had come to the Nelson farm looking for a stolen cow. Something happened and a gun went off. The deputy died. LD had fired the shot. 15 years old. And when the sheriff had come to arrest them, Laura told them that she did it. She lied. She lied because she was a black mother in Oklahoma in 1911. She knew what happened to black boys that killed white men. She thought if she took the blame, they would let her son go. That is who she was. A mother. That's the woman the photograph never tells you about. A mother who would take the blame for a killing that she did not commit just to try to save her child. And she thought wrong. So weeks went by and investigators figured out that LD had in fact fired the gun. Laura's innocence was established. She could have been released, but she was held anyway. And on the evening of May 24th, 1911, 40 white men broke into that jail. They took LD from his cell and Laura from hers. They took the baby. They dragged Laura and her 15-year-old son to a railroad bridge over the North Canadian River. The Associated Press would later report that Laura was raped before she was killed. Then they hanged her, and then they hanged her son. The baby was left in the dirt by the side of the road. One account says the baby survived, and honestly, I don't know what to do with that detail. I don't know how to feel. A child, a baby, left in the dirt, while its mother and brother were hanging from a bridge above. Sit with that. How does that make you feel? By sunrise, white people from the town were on the bridge. They brought their children. A photographer named George Henry Farnham took a boat into the water below the bridge. He took 4 photographs of the bodies of the crowd. He copyrighted them, and he sold them. White Americans mailed those postcards to family and friends across the country. The image of Laura Nelson is the only known surviving photograph of a black woman who was lynched in America, and it was sold as a souvenir. A grand jury was convened. The judge, John Carruthers, opened the proceedings by telling the jury that black people were the weaker race and were racially inferior. That was the judge in open court, talking about the victims. The killers were never identified. No one was charged. No one went to prison. Nobody paid for what was done to Laura Nelson and her children. The first federal anti-lynching bill was introduced in 1900 by a black congressman named George Henry White. For 122 years, over 200 federal anti-lynching bills were introduced. Every single one of them failed. The Emmett Till Anti-Lynching Act was signed into law in 2022, 4 years ago. That is the law that finally made what happened to Laura Nelson and her child a federal hate crime. Except it came 111 years too late. Her name was Laura Nelson. Her son's name was L.D. Nelson. She had a baby with her that may have lived. She tried to take the blame for her son to save his life. She didn't save him. She couldn't save him. She couldn't save herself. The county took a photograph of her dead body and sold it, mailed it, and waited 111 years to make what happened to her a federal crime. Say her name, Laura Nelson.
Lynching is not a relic of the past. Racial acts of terror still occur in our nation. And when they do, we must all have the courage to name them and hold the perpetrators to account.